All right, guys, today what we're going to talk about is the Articles of Confederation. So, what was the Articles of Confederation? The Articles of Confederation is going to be our first government system in the United States. So, right after the American Revolution, our founding fathers are going to come together and they're actually going to determine and decide what is going to be the structure of our new government. All right, what is going to be the structure? And they're going to be different, even when they create the articles, they're going to be different than anywhere else in the world. And that's why they call America the Great Experiment, because we're going to do a lot of things that is different than other countries had done up until this point. Now, the Articles of Confederation is not going to be what we use today. What we use today is actually the Constitution, and that's what this entire unit is on, is the Constitution. But we have the building blocks to get to the Constitution. We're going to decide after about 10 years that the articles really are not doing what we need them to do. So we're actually going to scrap them and we're going to create something new. But we need to talk first on what was the articles and what was the structure of it, and why did we decide later to change it? So, what was the structure of the articles? First, it was a unicameral system in Congress. And what a unicameral system in Congress is just one branch, okay? Today, we have a two-house legislature in the United States. We have the House of Representatives, and we have the Senate. Each one have certain duties that in Congress. Well, under the Articles of Confederation, we wanted to have a lawmaking body, but we didn't want to have a two-house structure at the time. So they decided to have a one-house structure, a sole body in Congress. They decided that they did not want a judicial branch, meaning they wanted no uniformed court system. They did not want to have a Supreme Court. They just wanted to allow each individual colony to determine what their court systems or what was the laws, rules of that colony or state. They had no preceding officer. That preceding officer would be chosen from within as a leader. So a preceding officer would be chosen from within as a leader. So meaning that the Congress would decide their leader. They had no preceding officer. Civil officers appointed by Congress. Civil officers within that government would be appointed by Congress. What were the powers? And really when we get into the Articles of Confederation, it was the lack of powers that really made people realize that we needed a change within our country. And you should have learned it during your 11th grade history class, but Shays' Rebellion is going to come out of this and out of the Articles of Confederation and show that under the Articles, the United States, we really didn't have a power as a country. There was no centralized power, no centralized government entity. So what could Congress do under the Articles? They could make war and peace. They could send and receive ambassadors, meaning that we could accept someone from France or Great Britain to come over to the country to talk to Congress. We could make treaties or peace agreements with other countries. We could borrow money and set up a money system. We could build a navy, and we could raise an army by asking states for troops. Now, think about that on the end. We could raise an army by asking states for troops. So what that means is if we went to war at the time under the Articles, no state had to send any men to help fight, okay? They could just ask as a volunteer situation. Some state obligations. Now, here is really the kicker under the Articles, is because each individual state acted as if it was its own separate country. And at the end of the day, we were all the United States, but Georgia did what Georgia wanted to, South Carolina did what South Carolina wanted to, Massachusetts did what Massachusetts wanted to do. This was really the origination of what we call in the Civil War the states' rights idea, that the states should be left up to the states to decide what is best for the people within that state. And that's really where we get that idea, is from the Articles, because under the Articles, each state acted as if it was its own country. So what were some of the obligations that the states had? They could by agreeing to the Articles, states had to provide funds, they had to send troops when requested, comply with acts of Congress, treat citizens of other states fairly, and surrender fugitives from justice, and open travel and trade between the states. So these were some of the obligations that they had. Now, they're not requirements, but they're obligations or expectations. Some weaknesses of the Articles. They did not have the power to tax. So there was no centralized tax system. Today, most of you that have a job, or for me, we all pay a federal tax. Okay, we all pay a federal tax out of our money that we earn through work. And so at the time, under the Articles, they could not do that. And the problem with that is, when we don't provide a tax, how does roads get built? How do schools get provided? Various entities, how do we pay military men? Various entities that we have in the United States, we have because of our ability or our willingness to pay taxes. Congress could not regulate trade. They had no executive branch. The executive branch is the president or vice president and his cabinet members. So there was no president at this time. George Washington was still just the general of the army. He was not the president of the United States up until this point. States could print their own currency, meaning that Alabama or Georgia could have a different paper money or different coins than that of any other state, which is crazy to me because there's no universal system. And we get back to that idea that colonies or states at the time did not want to feel required to be a part of or do what the other states do. Georgia is going to look out for Georgia. Massachusetts is going to look out for Massachusetts. We could not make the states follow the Articles. So all these obligations that we had set up under the Articles, at the end of the day, they were just wants or desires, but no state was required to follow it. All right. So if your parents told you, I would like for you to be home at 10 every night, but you're not required, you can come home whenever you want to, how many of you are going to follow those guidelines? Some of you will, but some of you won't. What happens when your friend wants you to stay out a little bit later? You're not going to be concerned with it. You're just going to do it. Why? Because there's no repercussions if you were not to do it. All right? So they were not made to follow the Articles. It was just a hope that they would. All 13 states had to agree to change the document. Now, I don't know about y'all, but how hard is it, do you think, to get 13 people in a classroom to agree on something, much less 13 different states to agree on it? The critical period occurred. Each state was eager to run its own affairs. Each state wanted to act as if it was its own country. They did not want to be required to do what the other states did. Foreign countries were hesitant to do with a government with so little power. Why would France want to help the United States at the time? Because the United States, it looked like a fractured country from afar. Because each individual state did whatever they wanted to. There was no centralized government system. The U.S. owed over $10 million to foreign countries for the war, but had no way of paying taxes. So we were in a lot of debt up until this point. And it got to the point where we were not able to pay our soldiers who fought in the American Revolution. Well, when these soldiers began to uprise and to riot, that's when people thought oh man, we need to change something. The Confederation Congress had no power to raise money to pay taxes or pay debts. And different state money limits. Annapolis, all right? Annapolis is in Maryland, and most of you are probably familiar with it because this is where the Naval Academy is in Annapolis. Leaders demand that something be done to make the central government stronger. They realize that what we have is not working. This country that we have created it's not going to make it if we don't make some changes soon. So a joint meeting of all states was called in Annapolis in 1786. Only 5 of the 13 states attended, so therefore it shows you right there that it was not so much how can we better our country, it was a very individualized approach that what Georgia does doesn't mean that South Carolina has to do it. Conference calls for a convention of all states in Philadelphia the next summer, and this is where we're going to have the Constitutional Convention. All right? So that concludes our discussion today on the Articles of Confederation. The things that you need to take away from the Articles is it was very weak. All right? It was a government system. All right? It was a government system, but it lacked a lot of powers and responsibilities. We were the United States, but we weren't united at this time. It was simply each state do what you want to, and each state make your own suggestions. Each state make your own taxes, your own court systems. So there was a lot of problems within our country. And from afar, we looked like a fractured country that was going to fall apart. And simply, at the end of the day, it was believed that most of our states would crumble and each one would break away from the United States and create their own country individually. So a change had to occur, and that's when they decided to hold the Constitutional Convention in 1787. And that's where we get what we have today, the Constitution. Have a great day.